I have seen the torch of freedom pass from hand to yearning hand, and the vision of our fathers spread hope throughout this land, as the dream some fought and died for in my heart becomes my own. I will strive to keep her promise, America, my home. America, America, may God bless America, and freedom reign across America, my home. From the shorelines to the prairies, to the cities great and small, we have reaped the fruits of justice and liberty for all. So with deep appreciation for the blessings of freedom that we know in this great land of ours, I'm Dr. George Simon, welcoming you to another edition of Character Matters. Welcome. This is where we talk about what I consider to be the defining issue of our time, the character crisis that is plaguing much of the free world these days, and in fact plaguing much of the world today, not just the free world. And this is where we talk about its importance to the survival of our great country. This country is only as good as its collective character. Its character is only as great as the sum of its the character of its constituents. And over the last few decades, I'm afraid the greatness of our country has been eroding. And that's because, unfortunately, we have more disturbances of character, more deficiencies of character among our citizens than in times past. Certainly since the time of our greatest generation, as Tom Brokaw called it. And we're paying the price for that right now. And that's the main thrust of my work for the past 30 years or so. And the main purpose for my blog at manipulative-people.com, my website at drgeorgesimon.com, another blog that I write for at Counseling Resource, counseling with 2 L's, resource.com. And in my 3 books, In Sheep's Clothing, Understanding and Dealing with Manipulative People, Character Disturbance, The Phenomenon of Our Age, and The Judas Syndrome, all of which are available from Amazon, BarnesandNoble.com, all the online sellers, your local bookstore, iBooks, any e-book service, Kindle, and on audiobooks through Tantor Audio. So visit the website, visit the blog. The manipulative-people.com blog has been especially busy this past week because I have been posting on a series of articles on personality and character and other commonly misunderstood terms in psychology. It's going to be a fairly substantial series. There's a lot of misunderstanding out there about certain terms and concepts. A lot of that has to do with the fact that Many terms have entered common parlance without much accuracy. And on top of that, unfortunately, even professionals misuse terms at times. So the current series is meant to clarify some concepts, clarify some points. This is the main thrust of my work. I try to take some fairly complex concepts and break them down so that the average person can really understand them, because that is the secret to dealing with character-impaired people. They're not really that difficult to understand, and they're not even that difficult to deal with once you know what really makes them tick, what they're really all about, the tactics they use, how they tend to see the world, the errors in thinking that they display, the way they try to deal with things in their life, and the way they interact with people. And once you get it, once you get what they're all about, why they do the kinds of things they do, what to expect from them, and especially how to deal with their tactics, things really change. And so that's the thrust of my work. You can find all those principles outlined in my books, In Sheep's Clothing and Character Disturbance, and in my book, The Judas Syndrome, and in the numerous online articles on my blog at manipulative-people.com, and also at counselingresource.com. The name of that blog, by the way, is Psychology, Philosophy, and Real Life. And I want to talk a bit tonight about the latest post in this series of psychological terms and concepts that are frequently misunderstood. But I also want to open up the discussion to you, the listener, because this is a topic that is pretty interesting for a lot of reasons, but mostly because most folks these days find themselves in a relationship, either at home or at work. In their intimate relationships, they find themselves involved with someone with some kind of disturbance of personality or character. And so we'll be talking about that tonight. And if you want to join the conversation, the number to call is 718-717-8296. That's 718-717-8296. Be happy to take your call. Be happy for you to share an event or a circumstance. Perhaps you have an example. Maybe just make a comment or two. Maybe you have a comment or two about something on the blog or one of the articles or something you've read in one of the books. Maybe you just have a general psychology question. Maybe you just want to know a little bit more about what makes that certain someone in your life tick. If you have such a question or something you want to share, give us a call at 718-717-8296. Be happy to take your call. As I mentioned, this current series of articles is going to be a lengthy one on the blog, and it's going to talk about the many terms that are misunderstood, many concepts that are misunderstood in psychology these days, despite the plethora of information out there. There's a lot of information. Unfortunately, some of it is just not quite accurate. I'm thinking right offhand of how many times people talk about issues of codependence and addiction. Just about everything is framed as an addiction these days. You can find so many articles and so many books and so many programs based on the addiction model. It's literally frightening. And you can almost expect when you hear something on TV or the radio about some high-profile person who has finally been caught doing something really egregious. They have finally gone way too far. Their massive sense of entitlement has led them to just go further than anyone would have imagined, maybe even themselves, and they've gotten themselves into trouble, and immediately they check themselves into treatment, and immediately they claim that, and professionals back up the idea, of course, especially at some of these ritzy locations, some of these ritzy treatment centers where the fees are like in the thousands of dollars a day. Sure, you got an addiction, come on in, we'll cure you. When in fact, the issue is one of character. And that's one of the things that we'll be talking about today. And that's what my post from last Friday on the Manipulative-People blog began to really explore. The whole concepts of personality and character. They're really very important concepts, and they're not what you might think. And they might not be as you have heard them described in some of the pop psychology literature, or maybe you've heard something on TV or read some other article online that has given you a false sense of understanding what these things are. I spent my entire life really studying personality and character. And I am so grateful for the kind of training that I got from some really fantastic folks who were well skilled in this science. Because I have to tell you, the helping professions have gone through a variety of changes in especially in outlook, how we perceive human problems and how we seek to rectify them. And back in the early 80s, there was a concerted push on the part of the medical establishment to basically wipe out as best as possible any of the more traditional assumptions about the nature of human personality and character. Now, I am not some kind of conspiracy nut, but what I am telling you is true. In fact, in subscribing to and reading the journals published by the AMA, article after article, especially advocacy articles for the field of psychiatry, which at the time was in somewhat of a crisis. Article after article, especially the advocacy articles, sought to medicalize the entire field of mental health like never before. And there were some articles that even took to task the entire concept of personality and character. And some of the criticisms were legitimate. Some of the criticisms pointed out that certain illnesses, for example, true biochemical depression, true endogenous depression, resulting from a neurobiochemical imbalance. Some of these things were at one time viewed as weaknesses of character exclusively. And people who suffered from these things were sometimes regarded, erroneously so, and inhumanely so, as weak, when in fact their biochemistry had become off, imbalanced. And, to think of some of the treatments that we had back then to help, or supposedly to help, and weren't working very well. So there were some legitimate criticisms, but as is always the case with fad kinds of things in science, The pendulum went way too far in swinging, and some folks wanted to really basically go to war with any other model of viewing human behavior and viewing the human condition. And they wanted to do away with this notion of personality and or character. And they wanted to medicalize the entire field and to say basically that every human problem was an outgrowth of some kind of biochemistry abnormality, some kind of brain abnormality, or at least some kind of brain malfunction. And that the ultimate remedy was going to lie in finding all of the biochemical correlates to these brain disorders and finding the appropriate medications and medical interventions that would remedy these imbalances and therefore restore somebody to normal, healthy, adaptive function. And in some cases, really some wonders were made. Some truly miraculous discoveries and treatments unfolded, especially for some severe diseases like schizophrenia and genuine bipolar disorder, true manic depressive illness. That'll be another program, by the way, when we go into the overdiagnosis of bipolar disorder. That'll be a separate program sometime. But I think there was kind of a throwing out of the baby with the bathwater, so to speak, in that movement in the early 80s, and that really took root in the late 80s and early 90s. And we over-medicalized the field, and we oversold the notion that every human problem of a psychological nature had to do with brain malfunction or biochemistry. Personality and character still do matter, and they matter a bunch. You know, as helping professionals, those of us in the mental health field, whether in psychology or social work, clinical social work, family counseling, professional counseling, marital and family therapy, whatever the case may be, no matter the discipline, we are actually asked and trained to look at all dimensions of an individual's function, not just what presents as the symptom, as the syndrome with which they're struggling at the time, but the whole person. Take a holistic approach. And what I found early on, I learned this very well. I was taught this, and I realized the truth of it very early on, is that it's hard to think of a human problem where personality factors don't play a role. For example, I gave an example in an article on Counseling Resource that I don't know if it's posted just yet. The article, I'll give you the title of it, is called Character, Our Psychological Immune System. And it may not have posted just yet. When it posts, you'll definitely want to check it out at www.counselingwith2lsresource.com. And I made the point in there that I encountered a person early on in my training in a psychiatric hospital who had had recurring bouts of depression. And this unfortunate individual had been treated with all kinds of medications, as was pretty recalcitrant in her depression. And he had shock therapy, not once, but many times. And although for a brief period of time, following electroshock therapy would do somewhat better, would always succumb again to a depression. And a physician and I on the treatment unit, had a bit of a discussion about this patient because we were both worried about the fact that nothing that was tried seemed to do much good. The only thing that hadn't been tried, because once again we were there in the era where the pendulum had really swung to this extreme medical end, and everything was being seen from a medical perspective solely. And cognitive therapy hadn't yet taken roots, and cognitive behavioral therapy hadn't yet taken root within the ancillary helping professions. So this woman was not given the adjunctive kinds of therapy that would help. We were coming out of the era where we were not doing traditional psychotherapy. We were coming out of that area, and certainly nobody was doing psychoanalysis anymore. And even if they were doing those things, they were proving to be of little value in these cases. But the newer therapies hadn't yet taken full root. So this physician and I had a dialogue about this patient that we were so concerned about. And I looked very carefully at this patient's history and the things that helped shape her personality. And this physician and I had a very big argument because this person in personality type, to me, appeared quite emotionally dependent. She had a very passive temperament that contributed to her dependency, and she tended to lean on those that she saw as more powerful and stronger than herself in character. And whenever she would lose that support is when she would succumb to a depressive episode. I looked at the history quite carefully, and there was this pattern there. And so the physician and I had an argument about this case because the physician believed, coming from the medical model, that all that I was seeing, this passivity and this aspect of personality, was really a product of this woman's Pacific temperament and her biochemistry. That she looked that way because her chemistry was off, and if her chemistry could only get right, she would be fine. And of course, he was free to play around with the meds and try and get everything just right, try new things, try innovative approaches, different combinations. And of course, even shock therapy was still an option. But nothing seemed to be working. So I asked if I couldn't have a crack at some adjunctive new therapies, and I decided to approach this case with the idea that there were shaping influences in this woman's life that shaped a personality, a style of coping. And we'll get into, in just a minute, I'm going to get into the definitions of personality and character and what constitutes a personality disorder or a disorder of character and why it's so important in mental health, especially if you go out there and get mental health treatment, folks. This is so important. You got to know somebody that gets it with respect to personality and character and knows how to deal with it. That's the real trick. But to make a long story short, I had a chance to work with this woman, and I focused all the attention on those ways in which she had come to think about herself and the world that predisposed her to see herself as ineffective, unable, and therefore needing to rely on somebody who she viewed as more powerful, more capable, stronger than herself. and setting her up for this pattern, this repetitive pattern of hooking up with folks that she regarded as strong enough to lean on, and then feeling abandoned and helpless every time she would lose that support. Either they would leave, they would move, they would die, whatever the case may be. Once her bulwark of strength and support in her life abandoned her, she was right back to square one and right back into a major depression. So I worked on that premise. I worked under the premise that she could change the way that she perceived herself and the world around her by challenging the way she thought, by challenging the behaviors, the self-defeating behaviors that she engaged in that kept her from developing the skills and the strength and the confidence to fend for herself emotionally. And as she began to do more and acquire a sense of competence and acquire a sense of vitality and realize that she could indeed empower and take good care of herself, she began to change. Now, personality is one of those things that, especially at advanced ages, is not really easy to change. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. But over time, this woman did change, and change remarkably. And for the first time in a long time, she stopped having recurring major depressive episodes. Now, she did have some recurring bouts of some despondency, but nothing severe and nothing requiring hospitalization, electroshock therapy, or anything of the like. And it was always about changing her approach. That's what made the difference. Changing the way she looked at the world, how she dealt with the world, her style of personality. And it made the difference. It made all the difference in the world. So I became even more convinced after this experience. I became so convinced that we had to, every time we intervened with a patient or a client, every time we assessed a human problem of a psychological nature, we had to approach it from a more holistic standpoint. We had to look not just at a person's biochemistry, we had to look not just at their history, not just their environment, not just their biology, but what shaped their overall approach to life, what shaped their overall personality and character. And was that personality and was that character functional? Was it adaptive enough for them to deal effectively with the situational stressors of life? And I went to work developing techniques that would not only help people come to terms with those aspects of their personality or character that were dysfunctional, but also give them the tools that they needed to change. Because by nature, personality is a tough thing to change. A very tough thing to change, especially when you've gotten past a certain age. You're not as malleable. You know, there's an old saying about getting set in your ways. Well, there's truth to that. You know, over time we get pretty used to the way we like to do things, and whether it's functional or not, whether it's adaptive or not, we get pretty well stuck in our ruts and in our habits. And so change does not come easy. But for most people, that's what's really essential. We don't want to put a Band-Aid on their problems. I know all too many people whose personality is really at the core of their difficulties, and when they start to have symptoms as a result, for example, they start suffering recurring bouts of depression or dysthymia, or they have repeated bouts of anxiety, then they rush to the doctor to get a pill to make them feel better. And they feel better, but they don't change their approach. They keep doing things the same way they have. And eventually, even though the medicine helps them feel better for a bit, they keep doing the same old stuff that gets them into trouble in the same old way and experiencing the same old stress. And as a result, things don't really get better, even with the help of medicine. So eventually they have to tackle the real problem, which is their approach to life. Now, in the series of articles that I've got going, and by the way, once again, let me invite you all to call in if you have a question or a comment you want to make, or you have an example you want to share. The number called is 718-717-8296. That's 718-717-8296. Be happy to take your call. But in the latest article that posted this past Friday, I explain just exactly what personality is. A lot of misconceptions about personality and what makes it up. Not the least of which is misinformation, not the least of which comes from misinformation from folks writing pop psychology books, publishing articles online. I read many online articles and blog posts by folks who mean well, sincerely mean well, but misrepresent information all the time. And it's really disheartening. But what is personality, anyway? Well, the term comes from the Latin word persona. And persona means mask. You know, in the ancient theater, the art of dramatizing events had not evolved at all, and all the actors were men. So if you wanted to convey gender or any other aspect of your character, you had to wear a mask that depicted that character and that gender. Also, the art of conveying emotion, the art of acting as we know it today, had not evolved. People basically recited lines, but not with the method that we have these days. So masks were also used to convey emotions, smiling masks, frowning masks, masks with anguish on them. So the actors on the stage put these masks on to convey all the aspects of the character they were trying to portray. And that term got borrowed by some of the classical theorists of personality who conceptualized personality as basically the social mask a person wears that hides their true self and their true feelings. It's basically the social front that they put on. And also the classical theorists believed that people do this unconsciously. That over time, as they're growing up and they face different fears and anxieties, as they suffer various wounds to their self-image and to their self-esteem, as they suffer various traumas and emotional hurts of one type or another, people construct these defenses to protect themselves against the slings and arrows of life and protect themselves against the anticipated hurts that life can deal them. So this is what the classical theorists thought of as personality, an unconsciously constructed social mask or front. And for some folks, and character disturbance and the Judas syndrome, and on my blog at manipulative-people.com, and in all my numerous online articles on counselingresource.com and manipulative-people.com, the folks that I affectionately call neurotic, this model still fits fairly well for such folks. Folks who are overly conscientious and overly anxious for the most part, this model fits fairly well. But it no longer fits very well for most people. And so a new and broader and more comprehensive definition for personality has emerged. And that is a more multi-dimensional type of personality definition. Various things are seen nowadays to contribute to one's personality, which can be defined as a style of relating, not just relating to other people, but to the world at large. A style of viewing the world, viewing others, and a style of relating to others as you see them and as you see yourself. And many things are seen to go into the development of that style. First, there are what we call the constitutional contributors to personality. Those biological factors, a person's temperament. Some people by nature tend to be more placid, more pacific in their temperament, whereas other people have this really short fuse, this really irascible temperament where they're easily riled, they're easily angered, easily upset, where others are just as calm and cool as a cucumber, you know. That's a temperamental contributor to personality. There are other biological factors as well. But that's one component. Then, of course, there are the environmental components. The nature of one's shaping environment. Was it a nurturing environment? Was it hostile? Was it full of trauma? Was there a wound a minute? Did the person experience terror fairly frequently? Were they neglected? Were they alone? Did they have to fend for themselves? So the nature of the environment plays a role. What the person has learned as a result of their experience. What works, what doesn't work. What's rewarded, what's not rewarded. What causes pain, what brings pleasure. All of these things contribute. Not only that, and this is very key, there is a dynamic interaction between all of these factors. For example, if a person is relatively pacific in their temperament. They're one of these don't get riled folks. They easily back down. They don't fight. They don't have that fighting spirit, that spunk in their temperament. It's just not there. You put them in an environment where there's an abuser, and they're going to feel pretty darned hopeless and powerlessness much of the time. And they're also going to come to learn, perhaps, that the safest thing for them is to appease as best they can that abuser so that they don't have to take the heat. So you see there's this dynamic interaction. It can go just, let's take the same environmental circumstance with an abuser in the family, and let's take another child, say, in that family who has a different temperament. Let's say they have one of those short fuse temperaments, one of those irascible temperaments. They're quick to anger. They're ready to fight. So this person comes at them and they fight back. They don't get very far, but they do anyway. And they develop a kind of contentiousness, and they develop a worldview. This worldview maybe is that the world is a hostile place. And in order to survive, I've got to fight and fight hard. So there are a lot of contributors to the person's personality development, you see. But everybody develops this unique way of approaching life. And we call that their personality. And unlike the old model where we thought all personality types were an unconsciously constructed social mask, for the most part, what you see is what you get. Who the person is in personality is who they are, through and through. Now, there are some exceptions. You know, there are these really manipulative folks that I talk about in my books, In Sheep's Clothing and Character Disturbance. I spent my life studying these folks. These folks who are all about the game of impression management, who know how to pull the wool over your eyes, who deliberately deceive, who want you to have an image of them that's carefully and deliberately constructed. This is not an unconsciously constructed defense. They know what they're doing. And they have a reason for wanting to pull the wool over your eyes. They don't want you to know who they really are. So it's a conscious act they perform because they want you to think that they're safe and that they're good, when all the while what they really want is the better of you. And you don't usually know that until it's too late. There are these folks out there. Maybe one of you out there in the listening audience knows one or has lived with one or has had to work with one. If you have, you might want to give us a call and share your experience at 718-717-8296. But that's personality. And for the most part, what you see is what you get. Now, a lot of folks speak about personality and character like they're one and the same thing. They're not. And it's important, you know, I know many mental health clinicians who make this error all the time. They speak of personality and character like they were one and the same thing. They're not. And the word derives from a different root as well. Character comes from a Greek term meaning it refers to it actually refers to the engraver's mark on a printing plate. It's the mark that an engraver makes literally a mark in stone, that creates a distinctive character for the purposes of writing. In this case, a letter character. And every character is distinct, right? And you put them together and they form words. Well, character is that distinct mark of a person, that distinct aspect of their personality that defines their social and moral integrity. It marks them as a person of moral fiber, one way or the other. Now, when we speak of disturbances of personality and disturbances of character, what we're talking about are people whose way of doing things, whose general approach to life, whose way of dealing with other people in dealing with life situations is a problem in and of itself. In other words, who they are is a problem because how they prefer to relate to others, how they prefer to deal with life, how they see the world, how they see others, how they see themselves, and how they choose to get along is a problem. It's not just that they're anxious or that they're depressed or that they have some other clinical syndrome going on. That's the problem. It's who they are and how they do things that's the problem. On a regular basis, it's their unique, quote-unquote, style of interacting that is the problem. And when a person's personality is so deviant from normal and healthy, and so inflexible, and so extreme that it causes big problems for themselves and or for others, we might say that they have a personality disorder. That's the definition. In other words, the way they do things is so contrary and so out of whack, so intensely out of whack, so dysfunctional. And because they're so inflexible, they don't seem to know how to do anything else. They can't modify that style, even when it would be appropriate or to their benefit. They just can't do it. They don't seem to know any other way. Then we say that they have a personality disorder. And the same is true of character. A disturbance of character is that aspect of a person that reflects their moral integrity when it is so impaired that it causes problems. We say they have a disturbance of character. And when that disturbance is so intense, so inflexible, and so deviant from what we consider to be decency, moral decency or ethics, when a person's character is so far off from what we would consider healthy or decent, and they don't seem to know any other way, and they do it over and over again, then we might say that they have a disorder of character. And there are certain personality types there are certain personality types that by and large tend to reflect more negatively on a person's character. In other words, there are certain personality disorders where it's more likely that you're also going to have a disorder of character. Such is the case with narcissistic individuals and with the group of individuals that I call, in my books and in my blog writings, the aggressive personalities. These two groups of folks are among the most character-impaired individuals that you'll come across. And these are the folks that I've spent my professional life assessing, treating, dealing with, and of course also dealing with the victims of these folks who have unfortunately found themselves in some kind of a relationship with such folks and have found themselves in a one-down position and really needed to get a handle on how to best deal with such folks so that they could preserve their sanity. You know, when it comes to disturbances of character, there's a tried and true old saying, pretty much, that if a person is making themselves miserable to the point psychologically that they think they really need to see somebody, and they go pounding on the clinician's door, then for the most part you can assume that to some degree they're pretty neurotic. But if a person is making somebody else miserable, making somebody else anxious, making somebody else feel crazy, to the point that they're desperate for help, but yet the person with the problem doesn't think they have a problem, doesn't want to change, and would only go to a helping professional if dragged by the ear, and they're going to go kicking and screaming the whole way, then you say that person probably has a disturbance of character, or maybe even a character disorder. And that's how you tell the difference between a fairly neurotic individual and a disturbed character. So that's the short primer on personality and character. You can read a lot more about it on the Manipulative-People website. That's manipulative-people.com. The series of articles that's going to follow is going to be a really substantial series explaining just about every concept that's out there in pop psychology, including all the psychobabble that's out there that causes folks to misperceive things and therefore to stay in one-down relationships. If there's anything that means something to me, it's that. It's so important for me to get the message out there to folks about how to perceive their predicaments, because that is more than half the battle, folks. I have to tell you, I get this feedback every single day and multiple times a day. You know, there's a feature on my manipulative-people.com blog where people can contact me via the back channel, via email. And I get at least 3 or 4 those contacts a day. And then I get contacts via email from folks who have read my books and have looked in the backs of the books, either in Sheep's Clothing or Character Disturbance or the Judas Syndrome, and found out how to contact me, or they've gone to my website at drgeorgesimon.com. Or they've read an article online and somehow gotten to me, or maybe they've seen one of the YouTube videos. They've gone to the YouTube channel and seen one of the YouTube videos, snippets from my webinars. and they'll contact me, and inevitably they'll say the exact same thing, uniformly. And that is that as soon as they started seeing things differently and understanding concepts more accurately, as soon as they, for example, stopped thinking of their character-impaired spouse as somebody who was unconscious about the things they were doing, who just didn't get it, who didn't see what they were doing, and realized that that's who they really are, and that they know what they're doing, and that they use their tactics carefully and deliberately to advance their own agenda at your expense. As soon as they got that and understood it and accepted it, and then learned the tools that I suggest about how to deal with those things, how to confront and correct, how to not tolerate, how to set the appropriate limits, how to call them on their game, how to second guess what they're up to. Well, life changed. Life changed for these folks. And man, there is just nothing more edifying than that for me. I just got to tell you. Makes my day. When I get a message from somebody about that they have now adopted a new frame on things, and that in adopting that new frame, for the first time in their lives, they were empowered in their relationship with their manipulative co-worker or spouse or boss or whoever it may be, and turn their lives around. It doesn't get any better than that, folks. That's exactly why I do what I do. That's why I continue to write. That's why I continue to do this show, to educate, to inform, because we're in the midst of the greatest character crisis that we've known in some time. And I believe very firmly that we're only going to be great again collectively, and our culture and our society is only going to be great and provide opportunity and provide fulfillment, and our relationships are only going to be whole, and our families whole and together and solid, and our relationships fulfilling. All that's going to happen only when we face and deal adequately with our character deficiencies. So that's my mission. And I'm so happy if anything that I've said tonight helps clarify anything for you, or helps inspire you in some way, or helps you understand perhaps a situation that you've dealt with. And I invite you to call in anytime at 718-717-8296 when we talk again. Next week, it's possible that I might not be here, and that there might be I might not be here live, and that there might be an archived program replayed for your benefit. That'll be announced, unfortunately, only at showtime. But I really don't know for sure whether that will be the case. But you'll know next week. In any case, it's always a pleasure to be with you, and it's always a pleasure to do my part to help folks with what I consider to be the defining problem of our time. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye for this week and invite you to tune in again next week for another edition of Character Matters. See you next week.